Right now, across 3 countries and 16 cities, the largest sporting event in human history is unfolding. 48 teams, 104 matches, more than 6 million tickets. And before a single ball was kicked, the organizers made a promise. This tournament would pour nearly $41 billion into the economies of the United States, Canada, and Mexico. A once-in-a-generation windfall. There's just one problem with that number. The last time the United States hosted a World Cup, its host cities didn't make billions, they lost billions. So tonight, let's put the biggest show on earth under the money lens and ask the question the highlight reels never do when the confetti settles: who actually pays and who actually gets paid. Chapter 1. The biggest show money ever built. Start with the sheer scale, because it is genuinely staggering. For the first time, the World Cup is being shared by 3 nations at once. 16 host cities, from Vancouver to Mexico City to Miami. 48 national teams, up from 32, playing 104 matches over more than a month. Organizers expect north of 6 million tickets sold and billions more watching on screens. Nothing else on the planet gathers this much human attention in a single window. And that expansion is not an accident. This is the first 48-team World Cup, up from 32, which is how you get to 104 matches instead of 64. More teams mean more matches. More matches mean more tickets, more broadcast slots, more sponsorship inventory to sell. The tournament didn't grow because the football demanded it. It grew because the business did. Keep that in mind, because it tells you who the real customer of this event actually is. And that attention is worth a fortune. Here is the headline that launched 1,000 press releases. A study commissioned by FIFA, football's governing body, projected that the 2026 tournament could add up to $40.9 billion to global economic output and support the equivalent of more than 800,000 jobs. In the United States alone, $17.2 billion in added value and 185,000 jobs. Those are the numbers mayors quote and governors print in bid documents to justify hundreds of millions in public spending. But where does a number that big actually come from? Economists call it an input-output model. You take the money fans are expected to spend on tickets, hotels, restaurants, taxis. Then you assume each of those dollars gets spent again by the people who receive it, and again after that, rippling outward through the economy. Multiply the ripples, and you get an enormous headline figure. It sounds scientific, but that model quietly makes 3 assumptions. That almost none of this spending would have happened anyway, that no other visitor stays home because of the crowds, and that the money mostly stays local. Hold on to those 3 assumptions. Every one of them will come back to haunt this story, and together, they are the reason the last American World Cup ended the way it did. And notice something about the map this time. There are almost no cranes. Qatar built glittering new stadiums in the desert. Brazil poured concrete in 12 cities. But North America already had its cathedrals, the giant, ready-made stadiums of the National Football League. So the pitch to voters was seductive. We don't have to build anything. We already own the venues. This, they said, would be the cheapest World Cup in modern history. And on one narrow measure, that's completely true. It's also where the sleight of hand begins. Chapter 2. The cheapest World Cup ever on paper. Look at the cost ladder of recent tournaments and your jaw drops. Qatar, in 2022, spent an estimated $220 billion, the most expensive sporting event ever staged, building stadiums, metro lines, even a whole new city. Brazil, in 2014, spent somewhere between 11 and 15 billion, and the 1994 World Cup, the last one on American soil, cost barely $500 million to stage. Against those numbers, 2026 looks almost frugal, precisely because the United States isn't building new stadiums. It's borrowing the ones the NFL already built. So the marquee construction bill, the part that bankrupts other hosts, is largely missing. Which raises the obvious question: if there's nothing to build, where does the money go? The answer starts with a phrase FIFA takes very seriously: the clean site. To host a match, a stadium can't just open its doors. FIFA demands exact field dimensions, that artificial turf be ripped out and replaced with real natural grass, that branding be stripped and rebuilt to its commercial standards, that technology, security, and hospitality all be upgraded to its specification. Take that clean site rule and make it concrete. Many of these NFL stadiums have artificial turf, sometimes under a roof. FIFA requires real, natural grass. So groundskeepers have spent months growing grass on custom trays at outdoor farms, trucking it in, and assembling a living field inside a domed stadium, complete with grow lights and cooling systems, for a handful of matches before tearing it all out again afterward. It is a small miracle of logistics. It is also money spent on something that will not exist in August. An existing NFL stadium is a starting point, not a finished venue. Each one needs millions in modifications just to be handed over to FIFA for a few weeks, and then, often, changed right back. So the stadium spending is real, just smaller and more hidden than a shiny new arena. 4 host cities in the South alone, Atlanta, Dallas, Fort Worth, Houston, and San Antonio, are together investing more than $2 billion across stadium upgrades, transit, and public spaces. That's 4 cities out of 16. And here's the quietest evidence that cities understood the risk. Not every big American city wanted in. Sports-mad places like Chicago, Minneapolis, and others looked hard at FIFA's demands, the open-ended costs, the control it wanted over stadiums and tax, and walked away. Chicago, which had hosted the opening match in 1994, simply declined to bid. When cities that live for sport take one look at the terms and say no thanks, that tells you something about who this deal is really designed for. The bill isn't a single giant number on a billboard. It's spread across a dozen budgets, 100 line items, and several levels of government, which is exactly why it's so easy to wave away as cheap. But the stadium was never going to be the expensive part. Because a World Cup isn't really a construction project. It's a logistics problem. You have to move hundreds of thousands of people safely into and out of a stadium on the same afternoon in cities that were never designed for it. And that brings us to the bill nobody put in the brochure. Chapter 3. The Invisible Bill. Here's an uncomfortable fact. The host committees don't advertise. American infrastructure, the roads, bridges, and transit that will carry these fans, is graded roughly a D by the country's own civil engineers. Visitors are arriving from places with fast trains and dense subways, and landing in cities built almost entirely around the automobile. Closing that gap, even for a month, costs money, and most of it falls not on FIFA, but on local taxpayers. The federal government stepped in with about $100 million in transit support, which sounds generous until you divide it. Split across 11 U.S. host cities, that's roughly $8 to $10 million each. For an event of this size, that is a rounding error. Washington also proposed around $625 million for World Cup security, because moving millions of people also means policing them. But the day-to-day operating cost, the buses, the trains, the overtime, lands squarely on the cities themselves. And moving these crowds isn't just a transport problem, it's a security operation. The World Cup is designated a national special security event, pulling in federal agencies, local police, overtime, surveillance, and coordination across dozens of jurisdictions and 3 national borders. Someone has to pay for all of it, and once again, most of that cost lands on the host governments, not on the organizations selling the tickets. The party is global. The bill is local. And those numbers are not small. Local spending is estimated at somewhere between $100 and $200 million per city. Add it all up, and the 11 American host cities are staring at a collective budget shortfall of as much as $250 million. Money they have to find for an event whose profits mostly flow somewhere else. To see how strange this gets, Go to the smallest host city, Kansas City. Kansas City doesn't have a subway. It barely has the bus network to move a normal weekday crowd, let alone a World Cup. So to host the World, it built an entire temporary transit system from scratch, a fleet of shuttle routes branded for the tournament, connecting the airport, the stadium, and the fan festival to parts of the city that have no regular service at all. The committee wouldn't say exactly what it cost, only that it ran, quote, into the millions, on top of a $15 million city pledge to meet its World Cup obligations. And here is the part that stings. When the tournament ends, so does the transit. For 33 days, the buses bloom. Then they vanish, and residents are handed back the same threadbare network they had before. As one local group put it, for 33 days this summer, Kansas City's public transit will bloom, granting more routes and greater frequency to tourists and visitors, all things that Kansas Cityans deserve every day. That single sentence captures the whole dilemma. A World Cup can make a city look world-class for a month. The question is whether anything is left standing on day 34. Now, to be fair, not every city is building something disposable. New York launched the most expansive ferry schedule in its history and a dedicated bus lane to the airport. Los Angeles is opening a subway extension in time for the matches. Seattle finished the final segment of a light rail line straight to its downtown stadium. Those are real, permanent improvements that will outlive the tournament. North of the border, Canada is projecting between $500 and $600 million just in transit and public safety costs for 2 host cities. So some of this money builds a legacy, and some of it evaporates in July. Telling the two apart is the entire game, and we'll come back to it. But first, we have to confront the deeper problem. Even the spending that does happen rarely adds up to what was promised. Chapter 4. Why the boom evaporates. So we have the promise, $41 billion and hundreds of thousands of jobs. And we have the bill, hidden, scattered, and largely local. Now for the hard part, the part the brochures skip entirely. Even the spending that does happen rarely delivers what's promised, and the reason isn't corruption, it's basic economics, and it has 3 names. Economists call them substitution, crowding out, and leakage. They sound technical, so let's make them concrete, because once you see them, you can't unsee them at any mega event, ever again. First, substitution. Imagine a local fan who spends $410 on a World Cup ticket. Boosters count that as $410 of new economic activity. But that fan didn't invent an extra $400 out of thin air. It's $400 they now won't spend on a baseball game, a concert, a dinner out. The money wasn't created, it just moved from the restaurant to the stadium. For the city as a whole, that's often close to a wash. But it shows up in the projections as pure, shiny growth. Second, crowding out. A host city fills its hotels, and everyone declares victory. But cities like these often fill their hotels anyway. Meanwhile, the ordinary tourists, the business travelers, the families who would have come in a normal summer, take one look at the crowds, the traffic, and the tripled hotel prices, and simply go somewhere else. The World Cup visitor doesn't add to the normal crowd. He replaces it. It's the Paris Olympics problem. The hotels were full. But in August, Paris hotels are always full. And third, leakage. This is the quietest and the most brutal. A huge share of the money a World Cup generates doesn't stay in the host city at all. It leaks out to international sponsors, to media companies, to global hospitality firms, and above all, to FIFA itself. When a fan buys an official jersey or a broadcaster pays for the rights, much of that cash flows straight out of the local economy and onto a balance sheet in Zurich. The city keeps the traffic and the cleanup. Someone else keeps the profit. Substitution moves the money sideways, crowding out swaps it. Leakage carries it out the door. Put those 3 forces together and the giant headline number starts to deflate like a balloon. This isn't a fringe theory. Brazil's 2014 World Cup was projected to deliver an impact around $70 billion. After the tournament, that windfall simply failed to appear. The pattern is so consistent that economists have a blunt way of describing these events, not a permanent engine of growth, but a short, intense sugar rush. A demand shock that spikes and then fades, leaving the bills behind. And if you think this is just academics being gloomy, listen to Wall Street. When banks like Morgan Stanley and major economic analysts modeled the 2026 tournament, they reached the same conclusion the professors did: a big event with a surprisingly small economic impact. A short-term bump in spending concentrated in a few sectors, quickly offset by all the forces we just described. When the boosters and the bankers disagree this sharply, it's worth asking which side has money riding on the answer. Chapter 5. Who really cashes in? Before we get to that ghost, follow the money to its destination, because it explains everything. FIFA expects to collect around $11 billion from this World Cup cycle, close to $9 billion of it from 2026 itself, nearly $4 billion from selling broadcasting rights, $3 billion and more from hospitality and tickets, and billions in sponsorship. This is, by a wide margin, the most lucrative tournament the organization has ever run. Record-shattering revenue flowing to a single institution headquartered on a hill in Switzerland. And for the first time in World Cup history, FIFA isn't sharing the stage. In the past, it worked through national soccer federations. This time, FIFA is running the tournament directly, dealing with host cities itself, and controlling essentially all of the revenue, media rights, sponsorship, ticketing, hospitality, merchandise. The arrangement is elegant if you're FIFA. The cities and states whose names are on the banners control the costs. FIFA controls the cash. One side takes the risk, the other takes the receipts. Now add the detail that turns a good deal into a spectacular one. FIFA has enjoyed tax-exempt status in the United States since the 1994 World Cup, so it is not expected to pay federal tax on most of the money it makes here. Mexico granted FIFA and its affiliates a sweeping income tax exemption as well, a nearly tax-free environment for the tournament's entire corporate ecosystem. So picture it clearly. Billions in revenue flowing to a non-profit, largely untaxed, while local governments scramble to cover a $250 million shortfall. And FIFA's financial engineering doesn't stop at its own tax bill. Working with host governments, it secured tax relief for the visiting teams and their highly paid players too, minimizing what the tournament's whole ecosystem owes. Meanwhile, all that revenue funds something crucial to FIFA: the payments it sends to 211 national football federations around the world. And those same federations are the ones who vote to elect FIFA's leadership. The money doesn't just fund the game. It funds the loyalty that keeps the people at the top exactly where they are. There's a phrase economists use for this shape of deal: privatize the gains, socialize the costs. Public money builds the stage, secures the streets, and moves the crowds. Private money, FIFA's money, walks away with the box office. And if you think that sounds like a cynical modern invention, I have bad news, because we have run this exact experiment before, in these exact stadiums. And the results were measured, published, and then almost entirely forgotten. Chapter 6. The Ghost of 1994. In 1994, the United States hosted the World Cup for the first time. By the measures that make headlines, it was a triumph, still the best attended World Cup ever by average crowd size, a genuine cultural moment that helped plant professional soccer in American soil. If you only counted stadiums full of happy fans, it was a runaway success. And that's exactly why what economists found afterward is so important, because the party was real. It's the profit that turned out to be a mirage. Two economists, Robert Baade and Baade Matheson, did something the boosters never do. They waited until the tournament was over and then measured what actually happened to the host cities, comparing their real economic performance to the rosy forecasts made beforehand. Boosters had promised the host cities a gain of around $4 billion. Instead, Baade and Matheson found that those same cities, collectively, ended up somewhere between $5.5 and $9.3 billion worse off than predicted. Not a smaller gain. A loss of billions where a windfall was supposed to be. And 1994 wasn't a fluke. Look across the whole modern era, and the picture is damning. Of the last 14 World Cups since 1966, 12 left their host nations with a net financial loss. 12 out of 14. The single most reliable outcome of hosting the World Cup is not a boom, it is a bill. The tournament almost always delivers exactly what happened in America in 1994, a spectacular, joyful, unforgettable month, followed by a quiet accounting that nobody puts on a poster. Now, in fairness, not every legacy of 1994 was a loss. As a condition of hosting, the United States had to launch a professional league, and Major League Soccer was born. 3 decades later, it's a multi-billion-dollar competition with its own stadiums and a growing audience. So the tournament did leave something real behind, just not on the balance sheets of the cities that paid for it. Legacy and profit, it turns out, are two very different things, and it pays to be honest about both. You want to know what substitution and crowding out look like in the wild? In 1994, the host city that appeared to fare the worst was Orlando, Florida. Home of Disney World, Orlando's hotels are packed every summer anyway. So when the World Cup arrived, it didn't fill empty rooms. Soccer fans, with their own spending habits, appear to have displaced the Disney tourists who would have come regardless and who, on average, spent more. The city swapped one crowd for another and ended up, by some measures, worse off than if the World Cup had never come at all. And this is not one grumpy economist with a spreadsheet. It is close to a professional consensus. As Andrew Zimbalist, one of the leading economists in this field, puts it, there is a substantial scholarly literature that finds hosting mega sporting events is not an economic plus. His colleague, Dennis Coates, is even blunter, noting that economists have documented the lack of impact from hosting the World Cup for about 2 decades. Read that again. 20 years of research, all pointing the same direction, while the promotional numbers get bigger every single cycle. So if you've made it this far, you already understand something most viewers never will, that the $41 billion promise and the historical record are pulling in opposite directions, and you can now watch this whole tournament with clear eyes. If that's the kind of story you want more of, the kind that follows the money past the headline, take 1 second and subscribe. It genuinely helps this channel grow. Now, having buried the myth, let's be fair to the other side, because there is a version of this story where the spending is absolutely worth it. Chapter 7: White Elephants and the Barcelona Exception. The graveyard of mega events is littered with what critics call white elephants, enormous, expensive stadiums built for a few weeks of glory that no one needs afterward. The most infamous sits deep in the Brazilian Amazon. For the 2014 World Cup, Brazil spent more than $300 million building the Arena da Amazônia in Manaus, a gleaming stadium in a rainforest city with no top-flight football club to fill it. After the tournament, it hosted a handful of matches in front of thin crowds, a monument to spending money on the event instead of on the city. Brazil learned that difference the hard way. As the government poured billions into World Cup stadiums for 2014, something happened that FIFA did not put in the highlight reel. The people revolted. Huge protests filled the streets, with a single devastating demand written on the signs. They wanted schools and hospitals built to, quote, FIFA standard. The same lavish care lavished on the arenas, directed instead at the things they actually needed. It was one of the clearest pictures ever painted of what mega event spending can crowd out. Qatar, hosting in 2022, at least saw the white elephant problem coming. Knowing a nation of under 3 million people would never fill a dozen giant stadiums afterward, it designed several of them to be partly taken apart once the tournament ended, with tens of thousands of seats to be dismantled and shipped to developing football nations. Think about what that means. When the smartest plan for your brand new stadium is to take it apart the moment the games are over, you've admitted the building was never really for your city at all. So is hosting always a waste? No, and the counterexample is a city that used a mega event to reinvent itself, Barcelona. When Barcelona hosted the 1992 Olympics, it treated the games not as the goal, but as a deadline, an excuse to finally build the things the city actually needed. Around 95% of the budget went, not into sports venues, but into transport and urban infrastructure, ring roads, a rebuilt waterfront, an upgraded airport, a city turned to face the sea. The stadium was almost an afterthought. The city was the point, and the payoff was extraordinary. That roughly $900 million investment is credited with generating billions in direct economic benefit and far more over time. Barcelona went from around 1.7 million tourists a year before the Games to roughly 12 million by 2019. It didn't just host an event, it permanently rewired itself into one of the most visited cities on Earth. This is the exception that proves the rule, and it hands us a simple, ruthless test for any host, including the cities hosting right now. Here is the test. Ask one question of every dollar spent. Would this still be here and still be useful if the event had never come? A stadium in a jungle fails. A shuttle system that vanishes in 33 days fails. But a new subway line, a finished light rail route to downtown, a rebuilt waterfront, a modernized airport, those pass because the city keeps them long after the last fan flies home. The event isn't the investment. It's just the deadline that finally forces the investment to happen. Chapter 8. Build or Inflate. So run 2026 through the Barcelona test, city by city, and a split screen appears. On one side, Los Angeles opening a subway extension, Seattle completing a rail line to its stadium, New York adding permanent ferry and bus capacity, cities using the World Cup as the deadline to finish transit. Their residents will ride for decades. That's the Barcelona model. Real steel and concrete that outlive the party. On the other side, Kansas City's shuttles that disappear in August, temporary overtime, one-off security, the grass torn up and relaid. Spending that buys 33 good days, and not one more. And that split is the honest answer to our opening question. The $41 billion headline is not a lie, exactly. It's a demand shock, a real but temporary surge of spending that spikes during the tournament and fades right after, dressed up as permanent growth. The lasting economic legacy of this World Cup won't be measured by ticket sales or television ratings. It will be measured years from now by how many of those subway lines, rail extensions, and airport upgrades are still carrying ordinary people to work long after the trophy has been handed out. So strip all of it away, and the machine underneath is simple. Ordinary residents fund the stage through their local taxes, their transit budgets, and the services quietly delayed to pay for security and shuttles. And the profits, the broadcasting rights, the sponsorships, the hospitality suites largely fly over their heads to corporations and to a governing body on another continent. The people who live in the host city take on the risk and the disruption. They are the least likely to see the reward. So through the money lens, here is the verdict. The football will be magnificent and genuinely priceless in a way no spreadsheet captures. But the economics are not magic. FIFA will collect its record billions, largely untaxed. Host cities will foot a scattered, invisible bill and absorb the risk. And the promised windfall will, if history is any guide, mostly fail to appear on the ledger. The nations that come out ahead won't be the ones that threw the best party. They'll be the ones quietly using the world's biggest game as an excuse to finally build something worth keeping. So the next time a politician promises that a stadium, a tournament, or a mega event will pay for itself, you'll know exactly which questions to ask. Who collects the revenue and who carries the cost? Is this spending that vanishes or spending that stays? And would we have built it anyway if the circus had never come to town? Enjoy the tournament. It really is the greatest show on earth. Just remember, while you're watching the game on the field, there's a second, quieter game being played over who pays for all of it. And that one rarely makes the highlight reel. I'm glad you watched this one with the money lens on. I'll see you in the next.